Welcome to Season 3 of Adapt, Climate Change and the Built Environment, where we interview professionals across the private and public sectors to discuss adapting the built environment to a changing climate. We believe that ensuring climate adaptation to extreme weather and evolving climate patterns needs us to re-examine what it takes to make our buildings, infrastructure, and communities resilient and adaptable so that our society can continue to thrive for years and decades to come. And with that, let's get started.
Hi, Mónica.
Hi, Jessica.
We're trying something a little different on the podcast today.
That's right. We're talking to 3 entrepreneurs who have developed products and services that can help the construction and the building industry be more resilient to different risks like heat and drought, water quality, and other health risks.
We first speak to Zachary Kiehl of VigiLife. VigiLife has a software platform called Safeguard that monitors and gathers data from individuals, heart rate, temperature, etc., and interfaces with analytics that can indicate to the user if their health is at risk from heat, poor air quality, etc.
That's right. And it interfaces with smartwatches that a lot of people these days wear. After we talked to Zach, we talked to Tracie Wagman. She's the CEO for ColdVest, which is essentially a blanket that gets cold very, very fast to mitigate the dangers of heat stroke. This ColdVest is portable, it's easy to deploy, it gets cold very fast and stays cold for up to an hour. It requires no ice, no power, and no refrigeration.
And finally, we speak to Andrew Crimston, who has invented a product called WashBox. And WashBox is a tool washing system that uses its own recycled water. So the benefits of this product include you use way less water than in a regular system. It can prevent chemicals from getting into the wastewater, and it has the potential of increasing productivity on job sites.
That's right. I'm super excited to talk to these 3 individuals and then also share all this knowledge with you all, our audience, because there are solutions that are available today, and we'll include their information on the notes for the episode.
Let's get started.
Hi, Zach. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mónica. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Do you want to start with telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure, happy to do so. I like to start my story way back when I was a junior in high school, when I wrote the career paper that most of us probably had to do about who we wanted to be when we grew up. I didn't know at the time, but I knew I loved math, science, engineering, physics, all of those STEM type disciplines, and I also loved the human body. At that time, I thought I might want to be a doctor, but I found the field of biomedical engineering. The more I studied it, the more I loved it, so I ultimately got a couple degrees, both undergrad, grad school, in biomedical engineering. Ended up having an opportunity to get an MBA as well. An engineer turned entrepreneur through some of the work I've done with the Department of Defense. So that was my first professional job out of school, was working on some very fun and exciting programs, some of which I can talk openly about and others I can't. I think the coolest way someone ever described my previous job was that I was like Q for James Bond. So I have developed some very interesting technology for some very interesting people, which ultimately led to the opportunity to found VigiLife. So engineer that cares about people. On the personal side, I am a husband and a father of 4 wonderful children. Born and raised here in the Midwest, and since this is a podcast focused more on the kind of built environment, I should say that I have done some manual labor. Grew up baling hay, starting my first job when I was 12 years old, and then worked on a golf course for several years on the grounds crew. So I've handled a shovel and done a fair amount of manual labor in my early days.
Nice. So you've got quite the breadth of experience and cool background. So I love all of that. I would love to hear those stories you can't tell us, but so why don't you tell us instead about VigiLife and what that is?
VigiLife, I'll start with the name. It's a portmanteau, which if you're not familiar with that term, it's a fancy French term for slamming of 2 words together. So it's a portmanteau of the words vigilant and life. And just as the name describes, we are focused on leveraging technology to protect and enrich the lives of at-risk people. Now, technology is a pretty encompassing term, so one of the challenges we specifically are working to fulfill is really this gap between people, technology, and insights. I think we've seen this in the consumer space and the medical environment where technology, especially things like wearable sensors and software, has really ushered in a new era of being able to gather data in a very passive, comfortable way on individuals. And while that can sound a little creepy, and perhaps at times can be, I'm sure we've felt like we've all had those scenarios where you're talking about something and you get a social media advertisement 30 minutes later. Is it listening? But I think there's a lot of good that can come from technology. VigiLife is focused on gathering data from individuals in these at-risk environments. That could be data from a commercial smartwatch, taking such data from some of these wearable sensors, fusing it with contextual analytics. So when I use that term, I often give the example of, say, Jess, that your heart rate is 170. So we know that's high, but if I have zero other context, I have no idea if that's a bad or a good thing. If you're out for a morning run, that's a great thing. If you're on a job site, maybe not a great thing, right? Maybe your core temp's too elevated. Maybe you're at risk of heat-related illness. So that's that contextual layer of understanding the behavior, the location, the environment of the individuals in. And then lastly, at VigiLife, we focused on providing insights. So fusing data with context to ultimately produce the right information for the right person. The right person could be the employee themselves. It could be a supervisor in certain instances, or maybe even anonymized data that's going up to a management team that might be making decisions for an entire organization. Fundamentally, at its core, VigiLife is a company dedicated to using innovative technologies like wearable sensors, software, analytics, artificial intelligence to really protect people in their jobs and making sure that they can make it home at the end of the day.
You talked about risks being a big part of what you do. What risks does VigiLife address?
Primarily focus on risk to personnel, health and safety, mostly in an occupational setting. We have done some work even in elder care, those types of environments. So technically speaking, any environment where somebody could be at risk of falling or getting exposed to some sort of hazard is really where we're focused. A lot of those kind of physical hazards. So some specific examples are things like heat. If you're familiar with the term industrial hygiene, that's the kind of science of things that might hurt you in the long run. So safety generally is much more focused on the slips, the trips, the falls, the accidents that could happen in an instant and you could lose a loss of life, whereas industrial hygiene is more on chronic exposure, looking at things like black lungs, something that on a daily basis you may not even feel or notice, which in my opinion are much more insidious. Lots of folks in their 20s and 30s don't necessarily think about what life will be like in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. These risks can range from heat to noise to stress to environmental hazards. Could be temperatures and humidity, of course. Could be, as I mentioned, heat or cold. It could be chemical hazards, poor air quality, whether there's smoke or toxicants or VOCs in the environments. It could be vibration. Somebody's perpetually getting exposed to vibration. There can be deleterious impacts to their health associated with that. Really, that's encompassing. We also even have sensors looking at things like more traditional medical data, looking at blood pressure, glucose, those types of things. Anything that pertains really to individuals' health, their safety, their wellness, and potentially even their productivity is something to be mindful of. I will say on the productivity side, we're very careful with that term, and we are not a tool used to measure human productivity for the standpoint of trying to eliminate the bottom 10% or anything like that. So really it's health, it's safety, it's wellness. So really capitalizing on a lot of the things that you're seeing in consumer wearables, Apple Watches, Oura Rings, Whoops, Garmin smartwatches, etc., and trying to bring that to a more occupational context.
You and I met during our collaboration in the heat study last year. Can you get into the details of what role VigiLife played in that heat study and construction?
Yeah, absolutely. And Monica, you made a great point that it's really difficult to improve something that you have no data on. So at the end of the day, if you have no data, you're just left with anecdotes of folks when you ask them, oh, how hot was it? And, it was really hot. How did you feel? I don't know. I was feeling okay. As I like to say, there's a lot of hazards or stressors that the human senses can't readily sense. I give the example, if you just show up on a job site and have 100 workers line up, pick out the 2 that have COVID that day, right? You're not going to be able to see that with your eyes and ears or your nose, those types of things. So that's really what we're focused on, is measuring the unmeasurable. So specifically with that heat stress study, we saw that there was a scarcity of data, and we partnered with some wonderful organizations, some insurers, La Isla Network, a Turner Construction Company was a company that we had the opportunity to work with. We put sensors on about 200 to 300 people. We also had some sensors on the job site. So we were grabbing environmental data such as heat index, wet bulb globe temperature, humidity, wind speed, and on the individuals, they had a chest strap to gather some physiological data like heart rate. We also had some smartwatches on them looking at things like step count. And we were able to estimate things like even their core body temperature. We have an algorithm that we've been developing in partnership with the United States Army and trying to estimate core temperature based off of heart rate observation, demographics, and some other factors. And we even had individuals swallowing ingestible core temperature pills to make sure that we had that gold standard that we could really compare against some of the data that we were collecting. And then lastly, we even did some urinalysis, which is the fancy term for collecting people's urine and analyzing it. And we had some really interesting results popping up pertaining to things like dehydration and potentially even markers for things like acute kidney injury, which a lot of individuals with the topic of heat are very aware of the short-term or acute risk. That is to say, if somebody gets way too hot, they could potentially collapse on the job site. It's a bad day for them. It's a bad day for the company. But there's all sorts of incidences related to the decrements to human performance as your body temperature rise, your ability to hear and perceive cues, your cognitive bandwidth, all those things can be degraded. And then honestly, we've seen some work working in partnership with La Isla Network of the longitudinal effects of heat, looking at kidney function. Basically, anywhere in the world where we've seen intense heat, intense physical labor, maybe shoddy workforce protection practices, and then especially where we've even seen abuse of drugs, caffeinated beverages, which rock stars, monsters, those types of things seem to be everywhere. Nicotine, of course, even too much coffee in the morning, those types of substances can increase your core body temperature, which can really be a disaster for your kidney health. So that study was great. We measured it all. We had data from urine, we had some subjective feedback from some of the users we were talking to, surveys and interviews, we had physiological data, environmental data, some behavioral data. It really was a seminal study for heat stress research in the construction industry. And the results of that should be coming out soon in some publications. And one of our colleagues actually just got some great news on an NIH grant that they put in based on that work. So I'm optimistic that work will continue and we'll be able to build off of it.
That's great. Mónica and I have talked a lot about that, the work you did there with the Turner construction crew, which does seem fascinating. And of course, you also brought up La Isla Network and kidney issues, and that obviously ties into our first season episode with Jason Glazer about the impacts of extreme heat on, in that case, really more agricultural workers. So we've now already raised the fact that you've been working with agricultural workers, construction workers. Are there other groups that VigiLife is working with to address these risks?
Yes, there are. And before I answer that, I did want to make a comment that I found that it was really interesting. I tested this yesterday in a presentation I gave in front of a bunch of construction companies that, speaking of kidney disease, like I make the audience raise their hands. I said, how many of you know somebody that has diabetes? About 90% or more of the audience will raise their hands. And then I asked the question, how many of you know somebody who might have chronic kidney disease? Maybe 5 to 10% of the audience raised their hands. And if you actually look at the data, pretty similar numbers. I think it's around 36 to 37 million people in the United States are diagnosed with those conditions. Now, they are comorbid with each other a lot of the times, but the reality is diabetes is generally well diagnosed within the United States. Chronic kidney disease is not. Approximately 90% of the people that are suffering do not know that they have chronic kidney disease because unless you're getting blood work or it's exacerbated to the point that you're seeing like blood in your urine, most folks don't realize they have it. So it really is an epidemic that we've been seeing starting to pop up where anywhere there's heat, we're really seeing that even here in the homeland. So to answer your question,
scary, but
yeah, it is quite scary. And I think it ties naturally into that question you just asked of, yes, the link to kidney disease was found in Mesoamerica, agriculture. Actually, believe it or not, even before that, it started in gold mines of South Africa, which I could talk a lot about. I actually just came back from South Africa a couple of weeks ago and talk about a physically intense working environment. But we've seen it anywhere where we've seen kidney disease, we've seen heat-related illness, but this ranges from construction, of course, to agriculture, to energy, public safety. Unfortunately, I got a story sent along to me only a couple months ago. There was a firefighter that had died in training due to heat-related illness. We're doing work with various government agencies, so naturally, folks that are carrying lots of weight, having to do long rucks, so working with the Army and the Air Force. We're doing work with the Department of Homeland Security, specifically the Customs and Border Patrol. As you can imagine, down on the south border, having to spend a lot of time outdoors. Even doing some work with wildland firefighters, which are a really interesting use case because it shows the potential of our platform. That population is exposed to a myriad of hazards. They've got heat stress, of course. They've got smoke inhalation, which 10 or 20 years ago, it was just, oh, it's campfire smoke, and it's really not an issue. But most of the research is starting to show that it absolutely is, and it's a carcinogenic substance. And then even like noise dosimetry, or some of the noise we're looking at, the running pumps and chainsaws and machineries around. So it's a really good example of folks that are exposed to a myriad of hazards that can potentially exacerbate. If you're struggling with the heat and trying to breathe toxic air, those situations are going to make each other worse. So I think it's really interesting use cases. So anywhere in the world, and again, I would also even say in the transportation logistics sector, starting to do some work in that space. So every time I land in Atlanta or DFW and folks out on the tarmac, right, there's lots of applications, delivery drivers. There's been some very publicized and notable incidents, some even fatalities with some delivery drivers here in the United States. It's easier, I think, to create a list of industries that aren't impacted by the heat nowadays. And I know the International Labor Organization is actually estimating 2.1, I believe is the number, 2.1 trillion with a T, lost dollars and lost productivity by 2030 associated from the heats. Sometimes I speak to some of these leaders. I've spoken to over 1,000 of them at this point in these various sectors, and a lot of times they immediately just go to, oh, maybe we only had one heat-related illness last year, so we don't really have a problem with heat. I said, I think that could be a very parochial view, and that one, we know there's a big issue with underreporting, and then two, even if people aren't necessarily collapsing on the job site, heat is still an issue. It's impacting productivity, and there's actually been some great research. There was a professor out of UCLA that was looking at OSHA data that saw that the gross number of occupational incidents, illnesses, accidents, and fatalities goes up when the temperature goes up. Things that aren't even classified as a heat-related illness, right? That fall that was characterized as a fall, was it actually somebody passing out or because their knees were a little wobbly from the heat? So we know that as the temperature goes up, occupational risk goes up. So it's something to really think about across all those sectors, is if you have employees operating in the heat, you are at risk, even if you don't have a lot of reported heat-related illnesses.
We'll make sure we include a link to that study on incidents and temperature rising. And we'll also include a link to a Time article from 2023. The title was Chronic Kidney Disease is Poised to Become the Black Lung of Climate Change by Aaron Baker. That's a great one. And on that note, as chronic kidney disease becomes more known, do you see insurers being concerned about this topic? Are you in touch with insurers at all?
Yes, it's funny. I heard someone the other day describe it as there's been a lot of topics here of late on the climate and these types of things. It's like a woke policy, right? And it's just made up and those types of things. And obviously, I won't get into the politics really associated with that, but you know who isn't concerned about wokeness, right? It's insurance companies. If you're looking for an organization that is actuarial to the tilt, it's an insurance company, right? They are soundly based on data in all of their practices. And naturally, they have seen an increase in the number of reported heat-related illnesses. Again, we know that it's underreported, and I think they recognize that as well. So naturally, they are starting to pay increasing attention to this. Actually, in the study that you'd mentioned, there were a few insurers that had actually participated and helped fund that study, calling out Liberty Mutual and Chubb especially. And then here recently, we've also seen some interest from some other progressive insurers. I'll mention organizations like Zurich and Nationwide have been really taking a proactive stance, and that they know that heat is a problem for the job site, both here and now, but also from a more longitudinal time frame as well. So I've been trying to talk to them for 3 or 4 years at this point, but I would say in the last year or two, we've actually seen them try to come to us and saying, hey, we recognize that this is a problem, and we're trying to find the companies, the research partners, et cetera, in the industry that are doing good work in this space that are addressing that paucity of data. Because that's really where they want to go, is it's hard for them to make a huge investment until they have the data. So that's where we're focused as an organization and partnering with them. And naturally, the model here could be a really nice model. As I like to say, I'm not creating a new business model. It's the same thing as installing your smoke detector in your home to get a discount, or the device in your car that beeps if you brake too hard to get a discount. Why couldn't progressive employers that are using new technologies that have a demonstrable impact on the number of incidences and improving the health and safety of the workforce potentially get a premium discount as well? It's rare to find win-win-wins in today's society, but I truly feel like it's a win for employees, assuming that privacy is not abused. It's a win for employers, and it's also a win for insurers. So yes, the insurance companies are starting to get involved, and it's really encouraging to see, as I think that's what's needed to really see this model start to scale, is that everybody wins.
I'm one who I love to bash insurance companies a lot of the time, but I really can't when it comes to climate change. They are the ones because a lot of times they're like, we're the ones who are going to have to pay for the problems. So we need to address this. And yes, they have, or if they don't have the data, they usually have the data, but if they don't, like with you, they want to go out and gather it. So I respect any organization that looks at the data and makes decisions based on that. For those who are interested, employers or others, other groups, even because this could again be nonprofits or whomever who are interested in VigiLife, is there a website? Do they just go on and click and say, send me a quote, or how does it work?
We pride ourselves on accessibility. So you can go to our website, it's just vigilife.com, and there's links to the App Store and the Play Store. So our product is primarily a software application that you download on your phone, can be used on tablets and iPads. We've got a web-based platform as well. We're a mission-driven company. We want to make sure that cost is never the primary obstacle. So the reason I call this out is, again, I was in Austin yesterday speaking to some construction companies and like, oh man, yeah, those software subscriptions are a little tough. And I said, guess what? We actually offer a freemium, free version of our platform where an individual worker can go to the App Store, they can download our app, they can make a profile, they can pair a wearable if they have one, and they can self-monitor. And we have quite a few people that are out there doing that today. I actually got a really sad note from a kidney doctor, nonetheless, who said, my son works at a company, an electrical company, got a lot of folks that are electrical linesmen, so this is the folks working in the buckets and the direct heat. And I'm not going to name the company because this isn't necessarily a great story, but they had a fatality. It was actually the doctor's son's colleague had died about a week or two prior, and the son of the doctor had experienced several heat-related illnesses to the point he had passed out in the bucket. So they naturally were feeling this firsthand, and they said, we're looking for technology. So of course, I gave them some information and said, hey, would love to talk to your health and safety leaders of the company. Unfortunately, and this happens more than I'd like to admit, I was ghosted. I didn't hear anything, but they actively went out and bought some compatible wearables and were now monitoring themselves on a personal basis. So yes, if people want to get in contact with us, hit us up on the website, hit us up on LinkedIn. There's plenty of methods. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. Folks can reach out directly. And then also, you don't need our involvement. You're welcome to go test our application. And I'm very proud to say that there are people, maybe employers aren't ready yet to adopt this type of technology who are benefiting it because of the accessibility of using commercial wearables and the accessibility on the App Store. So it's just one example of where we've seen that happen is the employee wanted to get it up the chain, but they weren't listening, so they naturally just took it into their own hands. And hopefully, I haven't heard from them recently, but hopefully that individual's been protected here of late.
Hopefully, the silver lining is that we all become more aware, right, around the data that we have to monitor. And I do think that we are all more comfortable with tracking data, right? Like I have a Fitbit, people have Apple Watches. We look at how our sleep was and our heart rate and all that. We're more and more comfortable with that. At this point, is there something else that we didn't ask you that you would like to share?
I think there is something, Monica, and you just hit the nail on the head with that level of comfort. And comfort's an interesting word. Is there's the physical comfort of wearing devices, and that's something we pride ourselves on with the diversity of devices we support, but there's also that comfort from the standpoint of privacy. Now, at this point, some of your listeners may be thinking, well, this sounds cool, and I will say we have actually saved confirmed lives with our platform before, so that's something we're very proud of. But privacy is probably the number one obstacle that we face, and I call it a data privacy spectrum. So that is to say, we have some environments, think of bomb squads and hazmat crews, where like they don't really care about privacy because they know that they're truly at the most risky environments that there are. But a lot of our clients, it's more of that worker on a construction site who might be a little concerned of how that data is going to be used. So I do want to say first and foremost, as you've noted, a lot of us are already using various types of platform solutions on a consumer basis. And if somebody's concerned about the types of data we might be gathering, I would probably encourage them to go delete every social media app that they have on their phone as far as geolocation, tagging, all those types of things. This is just a reality that if you have a modern day smartphone, that there's a fair amount of tracking that's going on. So why not use this technology to protect yourself, and then to the extent that the insurers could get involved to potentially even get paid. It's not a new model. We've seen insurance companies be willing to reimburse or incentivize people to be physically active. Get a certain number of steps, you get an Amazon gift card, etc. But I will say that our technology has a ton of flexibility on that data privacy spectrum, where we have some customers that have only deployed it as a wellness tool just for their employees. There's zero awareness from the organization, but most of them are probably somewhere in that space where the data gets anonymized for some of that kind of group level viewing to make decisions based on trends of individuals and comparison of groups. So I just wanted to call that out as technology is great. I have seen it save lives. I have seen lives lost because it wasn't used, but I also appreciate the justifiable potential skepticism around privacy, data security, and those types of things. So I'm not going to say we're perfect, but I will say that VigiLife really prides itself being a mission-driven company. We never sell user data, and really we're working with some really leading entities like the Department of Homeland Security that are really putting us through our paces from a data privacy and security standpoint. So thank you, Jess and Monica, for your time. Hopefully I've provided some useful insights, and for anyone who's wanting to continue the conversation on technology and people in the built environment or in other heavy industry, I am more than available. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Thank you for addressing the data privacy. That is basically, yes, just a constant threat pretty much in every part of our lives these days, right? Yeah, it's a constant balancing act, but given all of the risk that I do think about that when I'm sitting in my office 90% of the time, I may die of a heart attack from stress. But aside from that, I don't think I have any workplace hazards. And I do think for a lot of people that, that cannot be said. So I love any device that can help keep people safer as they're working and as we're all benefiting from their hard work that is, quite frankly, taking a massive toll on their bodies. So thank you so much, both. I think this is a fascinating product and for your time.
Thank you, Zach.
Keep up the great work.
Hi, Tracie. Thanks so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I love having this discussion and continuing the conversation to build awareness about the issue and some of the solutions. So my background is business. So I've got a lot of questions like, are you a material engineer, a scientist? No, I wish I had created the patent, but I found it. So mostly I come from the world of business, started and sold companies, and I formed ColdVest in 2023 when the product had already been on the market in Britain and Australia and mainly used for cardiac arrest. And we found customers had started to use it for extreme heat. So we formed a company in 2023, brought the patent over here. We moved manufacturing from overseas to the US, mainly because this was my first time creating a product, like an actual tangible product and not technology. That's proved to be one of the best relationships and experiences. Our manufacturer's incredible. And so basically the first product came off the line in May 2024. So it's, just been a year that we've been on the market. So that's my background and how I got here.
Very cool. So tell us about ColdVest. What is it? How does it work? What challenges does it address?
Yeah, so I do want to say we think it's a great name. And one of the problems we have with the name is people think it's a vest. It's not a wearable. So it's a bit more like an emergency cold blanket in the shape of a vest. So we consider it a treatment and less so prevention or recovery. It's much more when there's a heat stress or heat incident, ColdVest should be deployed, and it works by inside ColdVest are chemicals, urea and ammonium chloride. And when you add water to ColdVest, it creates an immediate endothermic reaction, which makes it almost freezing. And you lay it on a person, on their torso, or they could lay on top of it, and it brings their core temperature down from life-threatening to safe in about 22 minutes. The key with ColdVest is a few things that make it really great for these instances when you cannot have cold water immersion, is that it doesn't require any refrigeration, any ice, or any power. So it can be stored anywhere and deployed by anyone. We still understand that cold water immersion is the gold standard, and we would never tell anyone to not have a nice tub if they can have one. But ColdVest exists for those situations when that's just not an option. Austere environments, job sites where you just can't have ice or you can't have power. And we cover a lot of surface area. And that's why the product works better than sort of arterial cooling or just getting the head or things like that.
And so the idea is if somebody does start to show signs of heat stroke, heat exhaustion, one of the key things to do is to basically try to bring down their core temperature. It's kind of like a fever, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you get too hot, it starts doing damage to your organs. So that's what the idea is with the ColdVest.
That's exactly right. Yes. So when you actually I mean, you guys might know this and your listeners may or may not know this, but when somebody is suffering from heat stroke, and it can go from exhaustion to stroke in minutes without anybody knowing, you have about 30 minutes to bring core body temperature down before there can be permanent organ damage and even death. So our mission at ColdVest is it's 100% preventable, any death by heat stroke. Just the fact that you never have to die, it's 100% preventable, is why we're in business. So yeah, that's exactly it. Your inner organs are burning inside, and you need to react quickly.
And I'm picturing, and yes, I agree with all of that. And it is kind of funny because I think a lot of us are used to seeing, in some cases, heat, right? If people are too cold and bringing up their temperature with blankets or other things. And so this is the reverse of that. And then just from the technology standpoint, this is going to be really bad, but I'm picturing like those, what is it? Those ice bags where they don't actually get cold until you crunch them and break them up. I mean, is this somewhat similar to that? I know you have to add water.
Yeah, it's not exactly.
Okay.
It's much more technical than that. So it's you kind of lay out ColdVest, which fits the whole upper torso of somebody, and you connect a water bladder to it, and you manually push water into ColdVest, and that's how it reacts. And that's why it also it stays cold for about an hour. So not only is it great for kind of like immediate and rapid cooling, it can stay with somebody all the way to the hospital.
Okay.
It's not quite one of those ice packs, but that's how it works.
How much water do you have to add?
It's 3 liters of water. And
Okay.
when you purchase a ColdVest, it comes with a fluid bag that is marked, how much water to put in and how to use it. And almost any liquid will work. I've used pool water, river water. You can use Gatorade if you have to. We haven't ever had a situation where water is not available. But yeah, it's really just liquid meeting with the chemicals inside.
And the water doesn't have to be cold.
It doesn't have to be cold. The colder, the better, but it doesn't have to be cold. I mean, I wouldn't want it to be super hot. And also when you are storing ColdVest, it can be stored almost anywhere. When it comes to you sent, it comes vacuum. As long as it's not opened, you can keep it for 3 years and you can store it anywhere, which is another plus.
That's a huge plus. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's an emergency item, but it's hard to carry around or too bulky, you're just not going to have it where you need it. So,
or, I mean, you would know this when you're on job sites where you're on a, 50-story building, you can't get back to, somebody's collapsed on the 49th floor. How do you get them access to something immediately?
Which is a perfect segue into my next question.
Yeah.
Who, so far, first of all, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
That's very exciting. Unfortunately, I'm sure the demand for this is going to grow because as we talk about, it's getting hotter and hotter. And of course, this conversation about heat makes me think about a book I have not yet read, but Mónika has read, which is called The Heat Will Kill You First, right? Right, Mónika? That's the name?
Yep, that's right, by Jeff Goodell.
Yeah, so obviously this whole conversation is making me think about that. But right now, who have been your first kind of customers, I guess? Are there certain industries or even just certain regions of the country that so far have been really the ones who are realizing the value of this?
When we first launched last year, athletic trainers just right away, I mean, I think those people who are athletic trainers are heroes. And I don't know that they get enough credit, honestly. They are so smart, so data-driven, very scientific, and really looking for the best solution for, whether it be patients or students or what have you. So athletic trainers really quickly became our best customer. And also, because they're so rigorous, drove us to be very rigorous about our data, which was great. We started with schools and athletes. And 2025, our focus is really on indoor and outdoor workers. We're lucky enough to have some distributors who kind of help us in these markets. And, the indoor outdoor worker world, it really needs a lot of help. So we're really focused on that right now. We're also in Japan. which is, as you know, really, really hot. So I used to say it's almost anywhere where people play or work outside, but in manufacturing, it's inside as well.
It doesn't surprise me that athletic trainers were the first one to jump in, because there's actually more research in athletes when it comes to
Yeah,
what heat does to
yeah,
the athlete's body than
totally,
in construction. So
totally.
hopefully what we'll hear next time we talk to you is that it's being used in construction actively.
I mean, we are, it is now, it is in some sites and some customers, and we have a couple of amazing distributors in that world. And it is slowly, and I expect, I hope it gets more pickup too, because I agree with you. There's not a lot of study on that. Yeah.
If one of our listeners wants to get ColdVest in their job site
Yeah.
today, how can they do it? Do they purchase it? Do they rent it?
They can purchase it, and you can purchase it directly from us or one of our distributors, and we sell it in bulk. I will say, I get this question a lot. It's not reusable, and that is because once the chemicals get wet, they can't be reused. And in many situations, it goes to the hospital with customers. Some of like the fluid bag I mentioned can be reused, but not the actual ColdVest. So they can just email info@coldvest.com, and we'll set anyone up, help them
Sounds
out.
good. We'll make sure that we put that on the notes of the
Thank you.
episode. Do you offer any training alongside the purchase of the
Yeah, we've
ColdVest?
done a lot of research, and we have a full-time employee who's an athletic trainer, a trained athletic trainer. So we try to help customers and create a heat plan if possible. I know I said I'm at the treatment end, but if you're using ColdVest, there's an emergency. I would love customers and companies to be prepared at the front end as well. So we definitely help our customers understand options and signs to look for and how to be prepared, for sure.
Education is obviously a big part of this. Again, I always have to tell people I come from northern Minnesota, and growing up, we'd have hypothermia videos every fall in
Totally.
school, right? Which I moved to Connecticut, and other kids did not know what hypothermia was. I mean, we are now, and my kids went to school in Texas, and I know they didn't get any training on this, but I think we all need to start being trained and become aware of how to identify in ourselves and in other people these risks. Because otherwise, I will say, as much as I complain about heat, I know this is dangerous, but I don't know if I'd be able to identify myself or somebody else when we're actually getting to a point where it's serious and could pose life-threatening harm.
Yeah, and I've done talks before about emergency response planning. And one of the things we say is to have a buddy, look around, be responsible for the people beside you. And almost, I don't know if this does a disservice, but if you're just not sure, 3 questions. Is it hot? Is somebody working hard? And are they confused? Do they know their name? Those are just 3 quick signs that you can go, oh God, okay, yeah, something's happening. I mean, even with ColdVest, I almost say if you're not sure, deploy it, because the worst thing that can happen is someone gets cold. And the best thing is you've saved a life. So yeah, I mean, just quickly, those signs right off the bat.
I love those 3 questions. Yeah, and I think you touched on a very important point when it comes to heat mitigation. And it's not about us understanding if we're feeling sick or confused, but it's also about just noticing others.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
I understand often the person that is getting really affected by heat is not realizing that they're really affected by heat, but people
That's
around
exactly
them.
right. Yeah, until they collapse, maybe, or if they're confused. I mean, there are stories about people like, I'm fine, don't, and that confusion is actual heat stroke, right? Take me out of this cold tub. This is crazy. And you don't even, you're getting in trouble on the field or in this job site. There was the other story last year of someone who thought someone was using drugs, and they were actually suffering from heat stroke. So it's really understanding the signs is critical.
Was there anything that we didn't ask you that you wanted to share with our audience?
I just think planning and understanding and asking questions is really so critical. And exactly like you said, Jessica, I don't think a lot of people get trained on it and understand. And I had a student intern last summer who was a D1 football player, and he said, we get trained in the locker room on concussions. And I think this is the same thing. Can you get trained on heat? How to look for it, what the signs are, how to respond, what to do, and where your equipment is. Yeah, I think just training.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme among folks that we talk to about heat.
Yeah.
It's about education and awareness. Thank you, Tracie, for being here, for letting us learn more about ColdVest, and we will be in touch.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We are speaking with Andrew Crimston. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Monica.
Let's start with you telling us about your background.
Well, not surprisingly, I've got a construction-related background. I'm a commercial painter by trade.
Tell us then how that background led you to develop the WashBox.
So it really enabled me to develop WashBox as a needs-based solution, because fundamentally I developed it because of the frustrations I saw with the painters in my own business trying to wash their tools on projects. And there just wasn't facilities that was purpose-built that really enabled an efficient process. And then as I started going through the process of designing a system, I started learning about the sustainability and the environmental impacts around washing of construction tools. And this was really before green building was even a thing.
What were those issues that you learned about?
So it really came down to, I guess, in the first instance, the volumes themselves. You know, as a tradesman, as a trade contractor, we don't really think about the volumes of water that we use in terms of our tool washing on a day-to-day basis. It's kind of considered one of these, well, or not considered, but it's one of these niche sort of items that we go about in our day-to-day lives without thinking about too much. And so when I started to go through the process, and I feel like I was one of the first to actually give this some thought and go through the process, I started to record the volumes of water that we were using to wash paintbrushes and rollers on jobs. And some days on jobs, we were using 1,000 litres of water.
Wow.
And that's a staggering amount of water. And so when you start to extrapolate those volumes, that started to be concerning. And then because of that concern that kind of stemmed from the volume, I started to do some research in terms of what was in the paint and the other patching and filling compounds that we were washing out. And you put those two together, you know, one being the biocides and the PFAS contamination and titanium dioxide and other ingredients in paint that in liquid form are toxic to the environment, and added with the volume, I decided it was something I needed to try and address.
So it is about washing. What you noticed was washing all these tools that had chemicals in them, and they were just going down the sink and into water treatment plants and then into the river, right? But I think the average person believes that water treatment plant gets rid of the chemicals. Can you elaborate what happens in that water treatment plant?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Monica. That's kind of this realization that I stumbled across in this process that I went through. Because my view prior to this thinking was that when the liquid waste sort of gurgled down the sink and disappeared, because in those days we used to wash our paintbrushes in the bathroom, essentially in the sink where you wash your hands. I guess the view is that once the liquid waste, the wash water disappears down the drain, I had a sense that it was being dealt with by a third party, by a community wastewater system, and that the paint in those days that I was washing down the sink wasn't going to the local creek or the local river and ultimately ending up in the ocean. I figured that it somehow disappeared in wastewater treatment, and that what was the kind of result of wastewater treatment was something that didn't contain what I washed down the sink. But the fact is that the facts are somewhat different. Wastewater treatment, I've learned since then, really just separates liquids from solids. And so the degree of filtration that you have in those wastewater treatment plants, being primary, secondary, or tertiary, really just means more filtration. And everything that we filter out of wastewater needs to go back to the environment as a solid. And everything that we don't filter out of the wastewater ends up in the liquid waste stream that goes back to the environment, typically discharged to the ocean. So all of these solutions that we wash down the drain, from a construction project point of view now, whether they're paint or plaster or sand and cement or tile adhesive or render, you know, lots of these coatings and applied finishes these days are quite highly modified technology, resin-based polymers, petroleum hydrocarbons, all of these kind of complex terms, but they just don't belong in the environment as liquids in any way.
So you created a solution for this problem, a standalone sink. for tools. Tell us more about it. Tell us what you created and how it works.
Yeah, so I realized that the only way to solve this problem was point source recycling. So we created a wash station, which we call WashBox, which is a closed loop wash station. So in very simple terms, it's a holding tank for water with a pump, and that pump delivers washing pressure through a hose nozzle, like you would when you're out, washing the car or doing something in the garden. And by using the water that comes from the holding tank, a tradesperson can wash their tools, and the WashBox captures all of the wash water. So all of the paint and plaster and other materials that get washed from tools gets captured in the system. And it works on a batch cycle. And so when the water supply has been exhausted, which takes about an hour or so, sometimes an hour and a half of washing, depending on which WashBox you're using, then the system enters an automatic 15-minute cycle. And during that 15 minutes, the WashBox process turns that now toxic contaminated wash water back into clean water that can be reused for washing once more, and waste material in filters that will de-water over time into a solid, so it can be handled properly as a solid. And importantly, this provides a solution because there's no liquids that get discharged from the system. In fact, on a construction project, it doesn't have any plumbing connections at all. It works without a connection to a water supply and without a connection to a discharge point. So we call it zero liquid discharge, and the automation means that it's really wash your tools and walk away. And so from a trade contractor's point of view, all of the difficult challenges around recycling of the water and removing the waste from the water through the wastewater separation process is done automatically by the system.
That is really cool. How long did it take you to figure this out?
Well, it was only a short time, about 14 years.
Wow. I love inventors. That is real dedication. That's awesome.
I've got a mate that keeps telling me one day I'll be an overnight success.
Hopefully we'll help you get there. And it sounds like, I mean, the not having to be connected to a water source too, just makes me think even of things around the house or the yard where, you're like, oh, the hose can't reach there. I mean, that has to be just kind of, it's maybe not the primary benefit of the WashBox, but a secondary benefit, right? That you don't have to always have to worry about getting that water source on a job site, which depending on where you're working, there may not be a lot of, plumbing already done systems you can connect to, right?
Oh, 100%. To give you an example, we completed a project in the US, which was the Seattle Aquarium project. And interestingly, this represented a key market for us in terms of our customer base. And that particular project was a greenfield project, and during construction didn't have a water supply connected to the building and didn't have any live sewer. And this is common, which I never realized before I sort of got into this business. But many buildings during construction don't have a water supply within the building itself. And so how do you, as a principal contractor, ensure that your trade contractors have somewhere to wash their tools? They will often run a hose from a point on a neighboring property or somewhere outside the building, which is an interesting scenario when you're one of a number of 100 trade contractors involved in a construction process and there's one water supply for the entire building. So WashBox not only solves the discharge issue, but fundamentally changes efficiency on a building project by enabling the principal contractor to provide a washout solution that's mobile in the first place, because all it needs is standard power to work, and can provide that water where water doesn't exist. In some greenfield sites in Australia where we have WashBox, they actually truck water in, and then they use portable toilet scenarios, and so all of the toilet wastewater is trucked away. If you add the construction trade wash water to that toilet water and sort of personal wastewater, you end up paying a higher rate to dispose of that water as a liquid waste solution because of the trade waste contamination. So there are all of these productivity and cost benefits that come along with the sustainability benefits that we've created.
Yeah, I have seen WashBox in person and it has wheels, right? So if you don't have WashBox, workers usually use the janitor's closet sink or the finished bathrooms, which in theory should not be used, right? So they're pristine for turnover. So WashBox also addresses that, right? You can move around WashBox wherever, to a central location where workers can get to.
Correct. We've got 2 units that are available in the market at the moment. One is based on a pallet, an integrated pallet system, so it can be moved around by the forklift or a pallet trolley. And the second one, as you say, is on wheels. So it fits through a standard doorway, and it eliminates the need, particularly towards the end of the project, as you say, for the trades to wash out in janitors' closets or finished bathrooms. That adds another benefit, which is probably one of the biggest benefits that we create, which is eliminating the need to discharge this type of wash water product to finished plumbing. If you can imagine tilers who are finishing bathrooms towards the end of the project, their wash water contains lots of heavy solids, sand and sandy grout and this type of thing. And they're known commonly in the industry for blocking plumbing. And the last thing you want as a principal contractor, let's say you're finishing a hospital or some kind of public building, and the trade contractors, for lack of a proper solution for washout, go to the bathrooms or the janitor's closet to rinse out their buckets, and they end up blocking the plumbing, 3 months before handover, after you've been building this building for 3 years or something. It can spell disaster commercially and operationally for that project.
There are so many benefits to this. And yeah, that one in particular, that would be very frustrating for everybody involved. So where is WashBox being utilized these days?
So we started in Australia, and in Australia, we really are the go-to for all types of construction projects, from urban regeneration projects right down to kind of single office commercial fit outs. And we have a new product we're releasing shortly, which will get us into the single project home or family dwelling space as well. In the rest of the world, we operate in New Zealand, in London, in the UK, and also across the United States.
Beyond construction, are there any other industries that use WashBox or have the potential to use WashBox?
Yeah, there are. And it's an interesting question, Monica, because essentially what we're talking about is a point source solution that eliminates the liquid waste that's generated from certain industrial activities. And importantly, WashBox handles any waste that's liquid based or masonry based. And so any industry that uses those types of products suffers the same kind of issues that construction projects. And so if we think about the printing industry, printing and packaging, it's another industry where we're using water-based inks, typically machines that are used to print cardboard boxes and these types of things often are highly automated these days, have automatic rinsing facilities. They might be connected to a water supply, and they will discharge a liquid wastewater that has water-based ink contamination, which is very similar to paint. And there are a huge number of industries, from dry cleaning to laundries, that use water to wash clothes or provide a whole range of services that generate a wash water solution. Laundries in particular, their wash water is contaminated with microplastics, microfibers from clothes being washed. And so the technology is really quite universal and has huge applications, but at the moment we're really focused on solving the issue globally for construction.
Yeah, I was thinking within construction, an area that I know there could be a lot of need would be for concrete, right? I think about even just the ready mix trucks and needing to wash those out. That's a much larger thing that might be technically more difficult, but I could see it being valuable there too.
Yeah, it is. We're working on a solution there. It's a little bit of a challenge to solve just because of the size of the equipment that's needed. Lots of water volume, high pressure discharge, particularly from concrete pumps and those sorts of things, but we'll find a solution to that too.
I have no doubt. I love that.
How can a project team get a WashBox at their site, and how quickly?
It's pretty straightforward. So WashBox is available for hire. We don't sell the devices. They're quite a complex tool and they require professional management, which we do in the field. And so if a contractor reaches out to us, they can do that through our website. We can typically have a WashBox on their project within a week.
Okay, and we'll include your contact information on the episode notes. So if anybody wants to learn more, they can reach out to you. What is expected from the project team or, the tradespeople to maintain WashBox? You told us it doesn't need a water connection. It needs a power connection, right?
Correct.
What power connection does it need? And is there any other maintenance they have to do?
Yeah, so the power connection is whatever standard power is available in that jurisdiction. So in Australia, that's 240 volt. In the US, it's 110. The system looks after its own kind of operation automatically, but one thing that we can't solve automatically is the removal of the actual waste material. So WashBox transfers that waste material into a series of filter bags, and the construction project team are responsible to empty those filter bags each day. It's a very simple task. The bags are reusable and they last 3 to 6 months. And so the team simply takes each one of the 5 filter bags out of the system, turns it upside down into a solid waste receptacle, shakes out the waste where it will go hard very quickly, and put the filter bags back in the wash box. And then we have field technicians located globally that will go to the project and service the wash box weekly. And that involves managing water quality, proactive maintenance on the pumps and other systems in the system, and making sure that the trade users are using the solution correctly and that we're not getting waste building up because there's excess waste being dumped into the solution.
Mónika and I talk a lot. I mean, our focus is more on the adaptation side, right? And addressing climate change and its impact on both the building process and the end result. But obviously, you can't talk about construction without thinking, one, about its impact on the environment. Like you were talking about the wastewater issues. Again, excessive use of water in a lot of places now, we can't afford that. Anything that we can kind of turn into a closed loop is great. So you've got this technology, but what is the role that you're seeing as far as like even education about the need for this kind of product, the need for like global collaboration? What do you see all those roles playing in the long-term kind of impact of WashBox or your success, or even changing kind of the construction industry's approach to a lot of these issues?
Yeah, you're right. It's hard to think about building, and I know that, this word resiliency, right, gets sort of used a lot. And we're talking about water and we're talking about the resilience of the environment to stand up to pollution and these types of things. And so education is fundamentally important to any behavioral change that we try and implement. And if we think about green building as a subset, if you like, of the construction industry, green building is about changing behavior. That's why we go to conferences, to listen to expert speakers who have been down these roads before. Importantly, the work that we're doing at WashBox is really kind of centered around education and behavioral change. And one of the things we have on our side is that WashBox records data. I can tell you how many liters of water you're going to use for tool washing on your project before you even start, based on the square footage of the project, whether it's a school, a hospital, a multi-story residential building, a commercial office building, and where it's located in the world, because different jurisdictions build in different ways with different finishes and different regulations and requirements and different trade behaviors. And so we use the data that we collect and offer that up to the industry as an environmental forecasting tool. Because when people understand the potential impact of their behavior, that gives them some clarity around how much time and effort they should put into changing that behavior. And I mentioned kind of at the start of this chat that I was staggered when I found out as a tradesperson that we could use 1,000 litres a day to wash our paintbrushes. And when we go to a construction site and we talk about these numbers, people don't believe us. They go, don't be silly, don't use that much water. But then we put a WashBox on there and it records water usage, and we send them a report at the end of the month telling them they've saved 40,000 litres of water in 1 month with the installation of WashBox. We kind of feel now that we've got a responsibility, which is interesting because it's kind of not where we were at the outset. I didn't build this business because I was necessarily an environmental advocate, when I started, but me and the whole team, the global team, really feel now we have a responsibility to do with this information what we believe the industry and the world needs, and that is to use it to build awareness of the scale of the impact that we're creating in construction, and to use that awareness as a driver for behavioral change. And so we're building a global education campaign, and we're aligning ourselves with some really impactful global partners. And hopefully not hopefully, but in the next few months, in the third quarter of 2025, we'll be releasing the first continuing professional development module for the construction industry, so that people can start to understand best practice in liquid waste management, what it looks like, both for their construction projects in terms of efficiency and productivity, and also for their environmental impact. And so we're really excited about that aspect of what we're doing.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and beautifully said. I love it. Very
Yes,
moving.
absolutely. Yes. It seems like, I once heard that when it comes to water, there's three main challenges. Too much water in certain locations, too little water in other locations, and then also pollution of water. And it appears that WashBox is addressing two, right? This could be a solution for places where there is lack of water or not available water, and also preventing pollution of water. And to that, you're now adding awareness around, what happens when we throw stuff down the drain. So water stewardship and other aspects like productivity, like workers' productivity. So this is wonderful. We'll keep an eye on WashBox when that course is available later on this year. We'll make sure that we share that with our audience. Thank you for coming and spending this time with us, for educating us. Hopefully our audience learned something else. And again, we'll have your contact information on the episode notes. So if you want to get WashBox at your site, reach out to Andrew.
Thanks. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Adapt: Climate Change and the Built Environment. We hope you enjoyed this episode and come back to hear more of our conversations with people leading the way and addressing the issues facing the built environment as our climate changes. Please rate, review, and subscribe, and share our podcast with others who may be interested. And if you have any feedback or suggestions for topics or guests for future seasons, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at adaptthebuiltenvironment@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.